Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and the poll for today's video was actually really tight. So what I'm going to do, it was all about Tory rebels, in terms of particularly the moderates and the Remainers who've so far been keeping quiet are now getting a bit tough, apparently, with Theresa May. But the other two topics I'll roll into the poll for the next one, along with a new topic as well. So basically, at the moment, with the course Theresa May's apparently plotting with Parliament, we don't really know exactly what's going on, with a tactic certainly of running down the clock, but to whatever end. Many of the majority of her MPs who wish to avoid a hard Brexit at almost all costs have become increasingly belligerent over the past week, at least as far as we can tell from media reports. Not only with her Brexit tactics, but her leadership in general. It was recently reported that a significant body of Conservative MPs have warned Theresa May that she should make sure that she steps down within 3 months. During the vote of confidence in her leadership in December, she got through by promising that she'd be stepping down once she'd delivered Brexit. However, there are now reports that Theresa May is hinting at remaining in post as Prime Minister beyond the summer. She has today said that she's looking forward to pushing ahead with her domestic agenda once the UK has left the EU on the 29th of March. Now, this would be quite a dangerous game, as another vote of confidence could be triggered at the end of 2019 if she hasn't stepped down voluntarily by that point. Now, the statement is up for a little bit of interpretation, but it's hard to see how you could implement much domestic policy, if any at all, in the 2 months following what, if we do leave on the 29th of March, would almost certainly be a chaotic hard Brexit, if indeed we leave at that date at all. And if we don't leave on that date, then Brexit is still going to be in every department top of the government agenda. So, regarding Brexit specifically, because that's what a lot of the dissatisfaction is with, the MPs know that changes to the backstop are not actually possible, which means that they know her deal cannot be passed without hundreds of MPs just suddenly out of the blue backing down at the last moment. Not a few dozen, which may have happened, but hundreds. Now, that's not terribly realistic. So a no-deal Brexit, the path to hell itself in these minds, is then the default position. Now, just as I do, they may have consoled themselves with the notion that she is planning something at the end of this process. But they can't be sure. Certainly, if you listen to the experienced civil servants who actually understand what's happening in reality, their fear is that we end up with an accidental no-deal Brexit. It's understood that the majority of Parliament are against no deal, but it's equally clear there is currently no majority for any action to avoid it. And listening to these people, they don't really use terms like astute or clever when they're talking about Theresa May or indeed government ministers in general, but instead words like delusional. That does not encourage anyone that the UK really knows what it's doing. And a no-deal Brexit isn't simply bad because of the barriers to trade that would be thrown up. I mean, this is discussed a lot. There's a very serious fear that the UK will make a hard Brexit even harder because of the corner it's painted itself into. For example, I covered the issue a little while ago about the payment of the £39 billion in the event of no deal. Now, there are a lot of people who think that this payment is attached to the deal. I'd even go as far as to suggesting that the country at large believes that this too, in other words, that is our payment for getting the transitionary deal. And if we don't get the deal, then we don't have to make that payment. But that is not true. A very senior civil servant, who was our most senior civil servant in the EU at the time of the referendum, Sir Ivan, basically laid it bare when he said recently that were the UK to renege on its promise to pay what it owes, and that's what we're talking about here, what it owes, or respects the backstop, because that'd be another thing, neither of which are part and parcel of the withdrawal agreement, even though it is seen as being, then the EU would cut itself off from the UK completely until we behave. That would, for all the government's talk of a managed no deal, there'd be no management of it at all. It would be utter chaos at that point. And it's not just that the EU will be coy about dealing with us. They won't at all. Other countries who understand perfectly well what the UK population are blissfully ignorant of, will simply see a government breaking its promises and seeking to avoid its obligations. That will not exactly endear ourselves to the nations with whom we wish to do business. But that's just assuming the government was ever to be foolish enough to renege on its promises. But if it does comply with its obligations, as would be expected, then you have an issue within the UK itself. In the majority of the country, people will wonder what we're doing. That's because nobody is actually explaining the realities of the situation to the country. So even perfectly reasonable members of the population won't understand our actions because it goes directly against the diet of unicorns and fear that they've been subjected to for the past year. You know, they'll be thinking to themselves, hang on a minute, how come we're still paying the money? How come we're still doing all this thing that we said we had an issue with when we haven't even got the deal? So, you know, government in that position would be, well, effectively in an impossible position, really. And so this rebellion, which, you know, is trying to avoid such an outcome, doesn't just seem to be for the consumption of the newspapers either. I think it's something that Theresa May is wary of. At the moment, most MPs sort of know where we're headed. The tightrope that they're having to walk at the moment is, if a hard Brexit is to be avoided, then the Brexiteers will say that all of the woes of this country are because we didn't actually break away from the EU. We left the EU in name only, and we didn't really do it properly. And that the MPs responsible for doing this are all traitors. So MPs don't want to find themselves in that boat. But on the other hand, if we do go out with a hard Brexit, then the truth of it all will become clear for all to see within a year. And the MPs who stood back and allowed it to happen won't exactly be able to argue that they were just respecting the referendum, because that didn't even pose the question of leaving with no deal. So ideally for an MP, it's better to be supporting Brexit in whatever form, but for others to delay or halt it. That way the country is pulled back from the brink, few, but they don't get the blame. The problem is that most MPs in Parliament are in that same position. And obviously they're expecting or hoping that a majority of MPs will act against what might be their own self-interest to steer us away from it. But of course, they're all behaving in exactly the same way. But back to those Tory MPs, and it does seem to be a serious threat. How do we know? Because Theresa May has started meeting with senior backbench Remainers in her party last week. She had apparently, and this was news to me, quite baffling news, she'd apparently not spoken with them for quite a while. Now, this can only mean that she is no longer taking their support for granted. And just as an aside, this behaviour also tells you something about Theresa May's lack of leadership suitability. It was bad enough that she wouldn't engage with opposition MPs, people with whom she needed support to get her deal through once she'd lost her majority in the previous general election, but to not even engage with leaders of factions within her own party until she feels she needs them, that is absolutely mind-blowing. Will they even trust her when she only talks to them when she wants something from them? So, if Theresa May is changing her behaviour regarding the Remainers in her party, then it suggests that they've managed to wrest her gaze away from the ERG, at least temporarily. But reports so far only suggest that they're pushing her to extend for, let's say, a couple more months to conclude negotiations. But there are no negotiations. Not only is the backstop non-negotiable, but anyone who thinks that any part of the legal aspect of the deal is living in a fantasy land. Think about it. The withdrawal agreement had to be agreed by over 24 sovereign parliaments, not just the UK. People seem to treat the EU as if it's just one thing, one mind. It isn't. It's made up of another 27 countries, all with their own parliaments, which also have to have a say. The idea that any of these parliaments want to open it all back up for debate again when they have their own business to attend to, let alone all 27 agreeing to it, because that's what would be required, is beyond moronic. So, in fact, the only parliaments that might even be interested could be the ones that didn't get what they wanted out of it the first time round, like fishing rights or Gibraltar. And doing so wouldn't change the backstop, which is a regulatory imperative. So the more sensible amongst them know that the deal is not changing. They must also know that if we extend, that we remove the threat of a definite end date, so make crashing out more likely, not less. My reasoning for that is, at the moment, there is a fear that if Parliament doesn't do something, then out we go. We've got a date, the 29th of March. However, if we extend just because we haven't finished agreeing on things, MPs might believe that we just extend again. You know, if we're in the same situation at the end of the first extension, which of course we would be, because this is all about brinksmanship. But let's say we didn't, then we'd crash out accidentally. Exactly what the experts are warning about. So in order to remove some of the control from the Prime Minister, a Tory MP, Oliver Letwin, is drafting an amendment with Labour's Yvette Cooper, which would give MPs the right to demand a delay if there is no deal passed by the 13th of March, which of course is one day after Theresa May has said that Parliament's going to make a meaningful vote on the Brexit deal again. Now, this isn't the first time that a binding amendment has been sought by the House, and it has fallen slightly short so far. It might be interesting to see if enough MPs abandon party politics to get it through, though. This is where Tory MPs could show Theresa May how serious they are about rebelling, and it's a fairly safe amendment to rebel on. It doesn't really tie Theresa May's hands as such, and so it's not that disloyal. It doesn't even prevent a no deal. It simply allows MPs to delay the end date to avoid crashing out the 29th of March, with the EU's agreement, of course. It doesn't stop us crashing out late, and it doesn't state that there must be a delay if a deal doesn't finally pass, but it does let MPs take the reins a little if it isn't. Now, as such, any MP that doesn't vote for it is effectively voting to allow the Prime Minister to take us out with no deal if that's what she intends. Now, of course, as I've already mentioned, although a majority of Parliament are against no deal, there's no majority currently in favour of any definite proposal to take us away from that. And it's not like all moderate Conservatives are even getting behind Oliver Letwin's proposal. There is a rival amendment that will demand a delay, but a strict time-limited delay. And this is also put forward by Tory backbenchers. The problem with this one is that it's bound to be limited to before the European elections, and as a result only delays the inevitable. Now, being quite clear, it's obvious that the withdrawal agreement is not going to be passed if it doesn't go through on March the 12th. If on March the 12th, MPs are still willing to vote these things down and by a hefty margin, it ain't going through at any point. So that only leaves hard Brexit or no Brexit. As the Prime Minister herself said, it is like the one truthful thing she said. Now, no Brexit requires another referendum. Not legally, but politically. And that means an extension of potentially up to a year, probably at least 9 months. A few months simply won't cut it. Not possible. A no deal doesn't require an extension at all, other than possibly to tidy up legislation which isn't currently on course for completion by the 29th of March. But if enough MPs get behind this piss-poor amendment because it seems a bit tamer and they don't really want to rebel, because that's the issue. A lot of these MPs don't really like rebelling, they like to stay quiet. But the problem is their party is being pushed around by the ERG, and they can see this. They need to actually stand up and be a bit robust, but they're not really wanting to. So if they back the weaker amendment, then basically they're keeping Theresa May completely in the driver's seat. There's not even anyone looking over her shoulder. So are the moderate MPs who wish to avoid no deal actually going to rebel against the Prime Minister? We'll wait and see which amendment they decide to back, and it's no good if they split themselves between it. Then there needs to be a majority for one of these amendments. So anyway, that's what I sort of think about that. Let me know what you think in the comments below, of course. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe for further content, click the bell notification, and until next time, I'll see you later.